Hello, everybody. Adam Parks here with another episode of Receivables Roundtable. Today, I am here with my good friend Khalilah Lyons, who spends a lot of time in the diversity and inclusion space. She's got some really interesting stories and some really interesting products and services that she does from a consulting standpoint and building a community around diversity and inclusion and helping organizations to better address those things within their own ranks. How you doing today, Khalilah?
I am outstanding. How are you?
Another day in paradise. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. You know, Khalilah and I have been having a lot of sidebars for the past couple of months as she's been in the process of building Candidly Connecting. And I think it's just such a cool program, but we're going to get into that. We'll talk about all that. To kind of kick this off today, Khalilah, can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and kind of the career path you took to get to the seat that you're in today?
Absolutely. It's such an interesting thing whenever I think about my career path because it all just aligned so beautifully without me knowing that it was happening, because I'm coming to you today with about 20 plus years of experience, the majority of that experience having been a strategic HR business partner at different organizations. So having the privilege of working with leaders on their talent strategies and how those support their actual business strategies. So what do we need to do to make sure people are showing up and getting what they need to drive the business, but then also in a seat where I had employees coming to me and sharing how these policies, programs, and strategies were actually impacting them in different aspects of their identity as they were showing up to work, and then seeing what this looked like in different cultures. So I've been in corporate, I've been in a service center, I've been in manufacturing, I've been in a luxury pet resort as well, which was kind of a 180 in my career. But in all these different spaces, really seeing too just how important the culture was to driving engagement and ultimately the business. And so that was the bulk of my career. And then in the last 6 years, I've been able to really just hone in on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's one of the organizations that I worked at, they asked me to just create a statement for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then I recognized as I was doing this work and thinking about it, this is really what I want to do, see how it impacts the entire organization, not just how it shows up in HR. And so from there, I was able to lead diversity, equity, and inclusion at Conagra Brands, be a leader for diversity, equity, and inclusion at Discover Financial Services. And then as I was getting my voice and just speaking and doing different panels and then working with nonprofits, recognizing that I wanted to more so be in a position where I could help different organizations based on what I was feeling should be brought to the table around this work. So that's where I am today with two different LLCs, Answer the Moment, which focuses on diversity, equity, inclusion, mostly for small businesses and startups. And then, as you mentioned, Candidly Connecting, which is very focused on how do we empower adults in the lives of children to talk to them about the identity and the experiences of the people that we share community with so that we can start creating inclusion at the playground and creating a generation that's just growing up with inclusive mindsets and behaviors.
I love it. And honestly, I've had the opportunity to listen to a couple of the podcasts. I'm a subscribing member of Candidly Connecting, and probably not, the person that you would expect to be a, subscriber to all of this. But I find that the stories are very telling and kind of giving a new perspective on how I look at my own staff, my interactions with others, those kinds of things, because I do find like there's a balance that needs to be struck here. Now, I'm really interested in kind of the transition that you've taken in your organizations. Like you were doing, kind of like this HR work, and then you kind of moved into this consulting role, and then you decided like, hey, maybe I can consult for even more people and kind of bring this to the general public as well, which has kind of been that transition to Candidly Connecting. And that I feel like is a really interesting storyline in terms of how you've been able to make that transition. What kind of experiences have you taken from, kind of your corporate side of your, career into what you're doing now with the individual connections?
one that has just helped with credibility is because I've worked with leaders, I know how to speak to them, right? When I look at different consulting firms, a lot, and I've been in a seat where I've been able to hear what different DEI consulting firms are offering. It's really just about the unconscious bias training, or maybe this is how you need to recruit talent, and it's very almost prescriptive and out of the box. Because I've worked with corporate, I know the nuances of what a leadership role looks like. I know the nuances of the different programs and policies that are in place to impact employees. And I also just know leaders see DEI as an extra thing. In all reality, as important as I know it is, it's an extra thing to them. So it's helped me to really refine and make sure that when I'm talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm making it relevant to that leader. I'm making it relevant to that organization. And so my approach based on my corporate experience is different in that I'm not just showing up with what people need to do. And again, it's never just an out of the box strategy for people, but I'm also talking about how they show up in the work too. Having been an HR business partner and really paying attention to the nuances of behaviors and just looking at different strategies and why they work and why they don't work. It's not because you haven't come up with a good strategy. I think you can go Google 1,000,001 amazing diversity, equity, inclusion strategies. How you actually show up, how we're transforming your mindset to get some internal motivation to bringing this work to life. That's what's actually going to make or break how DEI excellence, I like to call it diversity, equity, inclusion excellence, is showing up in the organization. So my corporate experience, especially being an HR business partner, has really helped to make sure that what I'm doing is relevant. And again, not just about the what, but making sure people are thinking about their how and also about their why. I have pushed back on leaders to say, that's great. You want to go recruit people of color as part of your strategy. Before we even get to that, though, let's talk about the biases that you may have. Bias is part of the human experience. This is not to be a bad thing. But if we're going to bring people into our organization, we need to be aware of that, because that then impacts engagement, attrition, and all of that.
Well, it sounds like sitting in the customer's seat has given you a unique perspective on what the customer actually needs and how to talk to them about it. That is a unique kind of position in and of itself, having come from the customer seat and now getting to kind of shape these things and shape these kind of services, we'll call them, or consulting engagements, and bring them back into an organization. I think that's a really fun and creative approach to what you're working on. As you kind of think about where you are and where you're trying to go, what would you say is kind of like your professional mission, right? Like beyond the organizations themselves, but you as a professional, like what would you say is kind of like your professional mission?
It's so much of that is driven by my experience in corporate America and having been an outsider in so many different ways. So, an outsider because I'm Black, because I'm a woman, because I'm a mom, when I was married, because I'm married, when I was divorced, when I was divorced. So, and then again, working with people and seeing how they've been placed in different arbitrary outsider categories as well. It's really shaped my mission, I guess, if I think about it that way, to honor the potential, the possibilities, and power of our imperfect excellence and our imperfect brilliance in these different imperfect experiences that we have every day. And my mission, when I think about my work, is to humanize more and to community more with what I'm bringing to the table.
Okay.
And I like to just provoke.
You do like to, well, yeah, but you do it in a way in which it causes thought, right? So even in our conversations and the opportunities that you've taken to kind of give me the poke, you do it from a perspective of trying to get me to not just react, but to think about a particular subject or perspective, which I respect.
Yes, it is. I have been told it's productive provocation, and that I politely provoke as well. So whichever one you want to say.
You might have to trademark that particular phrase. I like that, right? That is very solid. So, kind of what drew you to this work? I mean, you've talked about kind of your experiences. Was it those experiences that kind of drew you to saying, like, I can do this better? Like, let me find a better way?
Yeah, and I don't even know if it was a matter of thinking about it in a better way as opposed to what feels relevant, what feels natural, and what feels
Mhm.
organic, and what's going to help just honor what people are bringing to the table so that, as cliche as it sounds, they don't feel like they're having to shift and form and mold themselves to succeed in these different environments that they find themselves in. And that is definitely from my personal experience. Even when I think about just being an introvert and how I show up and the value that I bring, but that not always being valued in a world of extroverts. Or, when I've been on teams with people that are more focused on process and data, and I'm more focused on the people and the strategy, and they're not
Mhm.
being of value in that. But it all needs to be part of the discussion. So going through those different experiences, and again, just feeling like an outsider versus this is different and it's of value, has really driven how I approach work and why I'm in this space, because we all bring something to the table. And again, the imperfect beauty of it all. So, how are we making sure that we're creating space and having a mindset that values that
Mhm.
those imperfect differences that we bring to the table?
I like that a lot. So, as an organization wants to engage you, and as you're going to come in and kind of assist them, and you go through kind of like an evaluation process, and you're building a program, talk to me a little bit about what that engagement looks like, because I know diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that a lot of organizations, especially those that are kind of listening to this, podcast, like how do they go about engaging this? What criteria should they be considering about themselves before they reach out or engage somebody like you? Like, what does that process look like?
There's a couple ways to look at this. One, I think businesses, right? They're focused on the bottom line. So if you're looking to continue to evolve as an organization, diversity, equity, inclusion has to be a part of the conversation. There's a ton of statistics and data that 100% support the more diverse your leadership team is, the more diverse your workforce is. That's allowing you to connect with the evolving landscape of people that you're looking to serve. So you have to have diversity if you're going to evolve as a business. The other thing, quite simply, is it's simply the right thing to do to make sure that we're bringing different people into the organization and giving different perspectives light, giving different people voice, because it doesn't even just impact the business. When you think about this work holistically, and another part of my focus is just community. As we're giving different people opportunities, it's impacting communities
Mhm.
as a whole. And it's also bettering us as a whole. The more that we can connect to different people's lived experiences, the better it makes us in how we're showing up in community.
So, but for someone who wants to actually like, what's the engagement process look like? So I reach out to you, we have a conversation about what
Yes.
leadership is ultimately trying to accomplish. Like I'm trying, I know that you're not the type to pitch yourself, and this isn't necessarily that I'm trying to move it down the sales pitch direction, but I want people to understand, like, what does an engagement like this look like? Because I think that
Got it.
there's misconceptions
Yep.
about what it means to have somebody with your level of expertise, and that does your kind of consulting come into my organization, like you're
Mm.
just going to come in, give a
Do an
presentation, and go
unconscious
home, and
bias
that's not
training. Yeah. And
yeah,
send you
and
home.
that's not at all what your world is like. So I want to try and kind of I want to take that to the next level and help people to understand like what a real engagement looks like, because there's also a lot of people that are not necessarily out there doing it the right way, right? Like you've got
Yes.
your method that you've developed through your experiences, but there's others that are like, yeah, I'll send you the PowerPoint, right? And that's not the reality of the situation. Tell us more about what reality looks like for a good program.
Yeah, let me start with what it's not. It's not just simply doing unconscious bias training. And
Mhm.
I won't engage with anyone that just wants to do unconscious bias training. And I get this from one of the companies I sit on the board for. If you're saying just, we probably shouldn't work together, because it's never just one thing, right? With this work.
Love
And
it.
it's not a program. It
Mhm.
doesn't have a beginning or an end, right? This is integrated into everything that you're doing. And I also like to provoke and say it's not a priority, because priorities shift. This is a
Mhm.
constant enabler to everything that we're doing. So when I'm coming in, I'm focused on a very integrated approach, and I call it the E-list model to elevate. So it's 5 phases, and we can, and it's 5 phases that allows for flexibility depending on where the organization is, because everyone's different in their journey. And I absolutely respect that. If we had time, I can tell you some conversations that I've had where I'm like, whoa, but they're honest. And I need people to be honest in where they are with their journey. So the first phase is looking at exposing and equipping on the E-list, right? So this is doing a pulse to understand what needs to be done to equip for change. So I'm having conversations with different key stakeholders in the organization, possibly putting out a survey, having focus groups to really understand. And like I said, just get a pulse on where the organization is. And then also with that, and this is a non-linear approach because it's not 1, 2, 3, check the box, but I'm starting to do the education and the experience. So this is having different dialogues, having different sessions. I try to stay away from trainings as well, because that has its own negative connotation to it. But going through different experiences and conversations is going to inspire and evoke that internal motivation around the work that's going to lead to the external behaviors that's going to close that gap between intent and impact. And that's a number of different ways that I do it. And again, it's not just here's unconscious bias training, go be great. But we're having some real conversations around like how the brain works, and why we have biases and experience, how our identities lead us and allow us to connect with people, and so on. And then it's establish and execute. So this is positioning leadership and staff to leverage DEI as an enabler in business operations, as a competitive advantage, and foundations for ways of working and how they're connecting through action. And then endorse and evolve. So this is ensuring actions are leading to integration and sustainability. So with my work, again, as a consultant, I'm not going to be with you forever. So I want to make sure that you're having toolkits and you're having frameworks and you're having the right scorecards and tools and even curated resources that's going to allow you to not just sustain the work, but also evolve the work as it makes sense for your business. And the last is elevate and expand. So this is if the organization decides, I'm still either on retainer or coming back in for different check-ins, to have conversations on where we are and how the strategies need to adjust.
And that to me sounds like a much more inclusive program, right? Like you said, program not being the right word because there's no beginning and end to these things, but it's the process of creating that integration into your corporate culture and kind of what does that lead to. So very, very interesting as someone who has been managing a multicultural and global workforce for a number of years now, the conversations that you and I have had have definitely invoked some thought for me in terms of who's working with us, what experiences are they going through. Like we hired, we had hired a group in Mumbai, India, and then then COVID hit within a couple of weeks. So now all these people were working from home, and my inability to understand what they may or may not be facing was very difficult. And so it was exciting. Like it's been challenging for me because every time I'm supposed to get on a plane to head to India, there's another wave of COVID, and now I'm not going there. So I've had people on staff now for 2 years that have never actually met me in person, which is just wild to me. Like I never thought that would be, a challenge that I faced, but the difference in our cultures, the difference in, the way that we view things and view the world at large has been complex to say the least. Now I feel like we've done a pretty good job of navigating the waters. We've had great, we've had great guidance from our teams that are over in India, and our leadership teams and our partners there. So it's been a little bit more creative for us, but how much of that is even happening just within the United States? And now there's organizations like yours that can assist in that process and making everybody feel like they're part of a larger group or a larger family. Even like as we were planning this session here, and as you mentioned, you're an introvert and I don't give out questions in advance for roundtables, right? Like, you gave me the poke and you're like, hey, look, this makes people really uncomfortable if you're an introvert and you're now going to jump on camera and you don't have any idea what or where this is going to go. So I appreciate you kind of running with my randomness in the way that I like to conduct these, but I think it also makes for a much more fluid conversation than to just have prepared questions and to try and kind of walk through those questions in that format. It's a lot
I
more
still
fun
say
for
it's a
me.
yes hands, which is a critical statement, just as a side note for DEI work. And because for me, it's not, and I was joking like I never sound scripted, but just, as an introvert, we process slower, right? And
Mhm.
so you may ask the question, and I'm sure when we end this 2 hours later, I'm gonna be like, so even just to have my bulleted point of what I
Sure.
know I want to hit on is something that helps introverts. And I talk about that, when I work with leaders, just on
Mhm.
ways of working and making sure, even when you're taking in ideas, don't just leave it at the meeting. Allow people to
Mhm.
have post-its so they can write their thoughts, and allow people to send you emails if they need to with ideas later. So just getting in that. And then as I'm listening to you as a leader, so much of what's important about this work that you're learning is, one, it's going to be uncomfortable until it isn't, right? It's complex. It's not, this is going to be DEI and it's going to be easy. Like, we need to walk into this knowing there's going to be some discomfort and change as we get to equity, but also how important cultural competence is to this. And you're talking about people in different continents, but even the different cultures. When I think about Chicago land, suburbs versus the city, and all these things, those nuances play a part in who's showing up at the table. So focusing on not just, again, bias, and we have about 200 biases that we work with, but privilege, cultural competence, psychological safety, which it sounds like you're doing a great job of creating for your staff. All these other essentials come into play in creating a culture where diversity is going to thrive.
Well, I think the statement that I'll leave everybody with here is that, the diversity, equity, and inclusion is not just, race is a factor, but it's not the only factor,
No, it's
right?
not.
There's so many other pieces and parts of the human psyche and personality that ultimately need to be accounted for
Yes.
as we look at these challenges. And I've sat through too many training sessions where they just, everything was about race. But I think the
Yeah.
fact that you're bringing up introvert versus extrovert and all of these other aspects of kind of being human, right, and how those things start to come together and addressing those, or at least allowing for them to be addressed within the environment, is incredibly important. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time to teach kind of our listeners about kind of the difference here, in that diversity, equity, inclusion is something that is considerably larger than race, although race is always an important factor.
Right.
There's just so much more to this. And I hope that some of our listeners actually reach out to you and have the opportunity to learn as much from you as I have had the opportunity over the past couple of months, as I've learned more about you and your organizations and your approach to the world, because it's really been a lot of fun for me.
I appreciate this opportunity so much, Adam, and I would love to have conversations. I am addicted to the power that conversations have to create change and to connect. So I am always here and available.
Well, I think as Candidly Connecting continues to evolve, and as you guys kind of go through that process, I would love to have you back on and talk a little bit more about not only the diversity, equity, inclusion, but the process of being a startup in that space and your
That's
experiences in the
great.
corporate world, and kind of how that transition has happened as you guys have gone through growth. For those of you that are watching, if you have any additional questions for Khalilah or myself, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. If you have any additional guests that you'd like to see me interview, or topics that you'd like to see us cover, feel free to leave those in the comments below as well on both LinkedIn and YouTube, and we will be responding as quickly as we can. Khalilah, thank you again so much for your participation today. I always enjoy a conversation with you, and today is no different.
Likewise. Thanks, Adam.